Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today's video is about crank arm length, and it's not what you're thinking. I'm not going to say shorter is better. We know that crank arms are kind of the trend is shrinking, and I myself went to a shorter crank arm. I love it, so I do recommend it. And many of the athletes I coach, they are also going shorter, and they also really like it. But today's video is not about longer or shorter crank arms. What today's video is about is if you go shorter, please make sure to change the measurement in your head unit. So I went from 170s to 160s, and I have a Garmin. So I would change it in the Garmin Connect. And I tend to do the same group ride every week. And I was noticing that my power went up by about 10 watts average during this group ride, but it felt about the same. I knew I wasn't really going harder, so I would go into my Garmin settings and it had reverted from 160 back to 170. So I would set it again in Garmin Connect to 160, do my ride, it seemed inflated, go back, it was at 170, and this just kept happening over and over and over. And finally I contacted Garmin and I said, hey, what's up? I keep changing it and it keeps reverting back. And they said, well, you cannot do it in the Garmin Connect app. That's not going to work. They said you have to do it in the actual head unit of Garmin. So I went into the settings, I set it to 160, and it stayed there. So that's the first takeaway. If you have a Garmin and you get a shorter crank arm or longer, whatever, change it in the head unit. Now, the second lesson, and this is from an athlete who had a Wahoo. She did a ride outside a couple weeks ago, and I had told her sort of like do a blind ride, just go out, ride at endurance pace, and it ended up being a tempo pace, and her heart rate was actually endurance heart rate. And I was shocked. I was like, wow, okay, that's really strong power. So I asked her about it. I said, you know, this is on the edge of believable. It could be fitness gains. There are other variables. It's colder. Maybe that's suppressing her heart rate a bit, but these are not the metrics we're used to seeing. She said that she had calibrated her power meter. Nothing had changed. It was just suddenly this really good power reading. So we didn't know what to make of this. So we had her do another test where we had her do the same heart rate and then the same power, see how it compared. And next week, same thing. She got the same values. So we thought, okay, maybe this is something's happening. Maybe these are fitness gains coming through, because it was the edge of believable. Remember, when I switched, it was only a 10-watt difference, and that can be the edge of believable. But then, for whatever reason, she was digging around in her settings and she saw that her crank arm length had reverted back to the original, not her shorter length. So she had it set at the correct shorter crank arm length, but for whatever reason, and we still don't know why, maybe it was a firmware update or something, but the Wahoo just set it back to the original, and that was skewing her data. So lesson from this is, if you have Wahoo and Garmin, every so often check. If you get these power values that seem skewed up and you've gone with shorter crank arms, it could be because the crank arm length is set differently in your head unit, and it might just randomly change without you changing it yourself, as what happened with my athletes. So double check that, and happy riding.